Hi, welcome to the ZP FoodSense weekly webinars. We like to do this weekly webinar just answering technical questions that have come in during the week. So today's the 12th of January 2025 and I will essentially jump straight into it. Now I do have a FoodSense Generation 4 in front of me, and the reason I say that is because I'm going to jump straight into questions, so sometimes the context means that people may not quite realize what we're actually doing here. In fact, what we're doing on the FoodSense Generation 4, and I just grabbed these just very quickly, is actually often testing chili and chili products. In that respect, people call it the Scoville meter. And I'm going to do some questions that have come in during the week. I do also have some samples that I'm going to be testing, not today, but actually I'm going to be testing some other samples, but somebody has sent in some samples that I will be testing soon, but just know that they won't be tested today. With that said, let me go forward with the questions. So we're talking in the context of FoodSense Generation 4 and its ability as a Scoville meter for measuring the SHU, the Scoville heat units of chili and chili products. So question number one, what about the calibration protocol? Now the reason that this has come up is because FoodSense Generation 4, there's absolutely a lot of validation videos online with us testing all sorts of products. People send stuff into us, etc. And you know, there's a lot out there. What you'll never see us doing is calibration, and I will address that with a demo very shortly. The validation study, how did we validate this? Well, we originally validated this versus HPLC, but also it's been independently validated by a gentleman called Charlie Rower, and I'll give you a link to that shortly. Instrument accuracy comparing with HPLC, this is really that part, that validation, it's the same thing. What I will say is obviously we have compared against HPLC, but just know that, you know, if you want to skip 20 minutes, HPLC does not compare against HPLC. What I mean by that is I'll show you data in this presentation where one HPLC house very poorly, let's say, correlates with another HPLC house. So HPLC does not correlate well with HPLC. And once upon a time, we used to make this big discussion about, oh yeah, correlation with HPLC. And then you get out there and you realize that, you know, there's hundreds of labs providing HPLC testing of chili products, and they're not necessarily correlating with one another. So to then say, do you correlate with HPLC? Is like, well, the first question is, does HPLC correlate with HPLC? And the quick answer is, actually, it doesn't. And I've got data on that. And then the accreditation body for the instrument, we're ISO 13485, so we follow an ISO 13485 quality system. That's not means that we're accredited with third parties like AOAC or ASTA, but I will discuss that as well. So the first thing is about calibration protocol. So let me just go to a camera here. What I want to do is I've only got one of these strips left, so I'll have to, I've got some more in order, but I'm going to take this device. Now when you look at the FoodSense Generation 4, it looks and functions a bit like a glucose strip. So let me take this glucose strip, let me put the glucose sensor in there, let me take my finger, just being a bit, I'll have to do that a bit harder actually. Right, there's the blood, okay? Now let me take the meter. I want to make sure I don't have to come back and get more blood. Right, so that's counting down now. You'll see it's quick, easy to do, and I've got a reading of 98 milligrams per DL, which basically means my blood glucose is 98 mg per DL. Now I just want to go back to this screen just for a second here and just say, when you read the side of the packaging on a glucose strip, it says no coding. Now Zimmer and Peacock is ISO 13485. So this means we do contract development, contract manufacturing of technologies like glucose strips. It's really important, see, because in fact I started my career making glucose strips, and so we don't have this mindset of calibration in situ. When you do calibration in situ, it's because either the instruments are going out of spec quite regularly. So HPLC, it's a very complex system. You actually need to periodically calibrate it. But with a system like this, we're actually much more similar to a glucose strip. And there's, you know, millions of these measurements being made a day by diabetics to help them control their blood glucose, and there's no calibration. So that's why there is actually no calibration on this particular instrument. Now what I want to do is I just want to go back and actually sort of show you what I mean by the workflows are similar. So let me take a chili sensor. It's like taking a glucose strip. Also something similar to a glucose strip as well is that this sample is pretty, this is a 1 in 10 dilution of a chili sauce. I'm just going to put 50 microliters on there, but the sample, whoops daisy, the sample is in no way filtered or centrifuged or anything like that. It is vortex, by the way. I do have a vortex here. Let me just drop that down like that. And let me just go to settings. Right, chili sauce, and I'll go continue, start, and off it goes. Now the reason I do that is it's really similar in many aspects actually to that glucose strip. So please understand the mindset when we're making products is they should be simple, easy to use, and low cost. And so I really feel like actually, the way a glucose strip works is exactly the way that we would have made this work. So this is the result. Now I know this is very boring the way I just did it, and what I was actually testing, let's just grab it, was this, and I know it's very standard, very easy to do, but it just makes for a quick, easy demo. And it's also, you can validate, you can look up online the hotness of a Tabasco sauce, because it's a very kind of, they have a very professional setup, and they probably really do know how to control their process. Right, now there's something very different also about the FoodSense Generation 4, and I just want to change screens for a second, because it says on my phone upload complete, and this is the bit where people really have to understand that there's an amazing transparency to this device. So I can see my data here, I can come up here, I can see my peak 1, peak 2, and peak 3. Peak 1, peak 2, and peak 3. These are the 3 peaks of capsaicin. I can see the analysis. I can, so I can really see this is capsaicin. And the peak height is turned from that into Scoville heat units, which also appears on the phone. So you don't have to look at this online stuff. But I'm really sorry that when you actually, for example, use high performance liquid chromatography, all you get is a certificate of analysis. You do not get this transparency in terms of name, date, time, who did it, raw signal, and number. So it's a very transparent system, and I'd actually say it's more transparent than the glucose meter. So there's millions of people using glucose meters a day, and they get these numbers, but of course they get no vision on the signal. Why? Because actually it would end up confusing consumers. But of course, when you're talking about chili sensor, you're generally dealing with quality assurance. You're generally dealing with quality managers, and so they kind of have a technical background, and they can look at raw signal and just make sure everything's working okay. So the quick answer is there is no calibration, the same way there is no calibration on these devices either, and that's just our mindset, that we want it to be quick and simple and relatively low cost. So just know that that is the design principle at ZP. If you want validation studies, there are actually some academic peer-reviewed papers out there. This link will take you to them, and you can find some work by a guy called Charlie Roa. We've also done our own work now, but I just find that, if people are, in the end, well, in fact, I'll show you some HPLC work next as well, because once upon a time, we were also very obsessed with correlating with HPLC, and we put a lot of work into it, and Charlie Roa's done his own independent work. And then you find out that, is this HPLC lab to lab actually even that good? So just out of interest, if you take a sample, and I'll give you real data on this in a minute, and you send a sample to an HPLC lab, you'll get a Scoville heat unit and a certificate of analysis. If you send it to another lab, you'll get a certificate of analysis with a Scoville heat unit. And if you send it to another lab, you'll get maybe a certificate of analysis and a Scoville heat unit. By the way, I'm noticing that some labs don't even do the certificate of analysis. They just get an email. So there's really just a number. So you've got no transparency on those numbers, just FYI. And look at this. Look at the transparency that we're giving. So I'm very sorry, but we're actually giving an amazing amount of transparency on those numbers that we're actually giving out. You can see the raw signal. people literally have to go and ask and beg to get the chromatograms. So behind the certificate of analysis on HPLC. By the way, HPLC actually means high pressure liquid chromatography. And over the years now, the vendors, I think, have renamed it high performance liquid chromatography, because performance sounds better than pressure. But HPLC actually stands for high pressure liquid chromatography. Anyway, that said, you have to go and really beg to get the chromatograms. And I've looked at the chromatograms, and they're not always what people think. People get the number, they believe it, but actually they've never really looked at the chromatogram. I would also argue if you sent the same sample to the same lab on 3 different occasions with different sample IDs, you'll get 3 different results back. So it's really important to understand that HPLC is not the gold standard that people would otherwise envisage it to be. So here's an example here where, in fact, somebody had a FoodSense Generation 4 and they compared it against an HPLC house, and we had good correlation. So 0.99, I mean, it's, with the experimental error, we correlate really well. So this is not my data. It's my instrument, the FoodSense Generation 4, but everything else was done by a client. And then exactly the same here with another client who also sent their, I'll just turn myself off for a second so I'm not, also sent same samples. They tested it on the FoodSense Generation 4. They sent it off to an HPLC house. Another good correlation. But this is the real kicker. Neither of the HPLC houses correlated with one another. So they actually do not correlate together. So this is when I sort of in the end realized we have to stop this discussion about, how do we correlate against HPLC, because HPLC does not correlate against HPLC. I would generally say that if HPLC was low cost, easy to use, and possibly reliable, there would not be a place for FoodSense Generation 4. But there is a place for FoodSense Generation 4. And why is that? Because actually a lot of people, especially the quality managers, know actually that the HPLC is too expensive to do, is not transparent, and they sometimes have their doubts about the results. So they're paying for it, and when the results comes in, they're like, is it really correct? Because there's really no transparency. Whereas, of course, with FoodSense Generation 4, peak 1 for capsaicin, peak 2 for capsaicin, peak 3 for capsaicin, you can question the data. Whereas you really can't do this with an HPLC system. Now, some of this comes from the fact that HPLC is actually so complex. I suppose in this particular slide, I don't even deal with the complexity of sample preparation for HPLC. The complexity is, there's quite a lot of complexity, and whenever you have a complexity, you have an error. So each stage of preparation, you can have an error, and an error all builds up. Then you actually have to run the HPLC itself. And the reason why that there's not so much testing going on essentially in the chili market is because actually the instruments are expensive, and they've got a pump in them, so solvents, pumps, injection systems, the columns themselves, which get periodically replaced, the detection, the recording system. And when you're actually getting HPLC tested by a third party, you don't know when that system was last calibrated. You just assume that the results coming out of it are actually accurate. And in fact, I think there's a problem with both the method of test. It's a complicated piece of equipment to run, but people make the assumption that it's just accurate. But actually, our own studies have shown that different HPLC houses are not correlating with one another, so you could question the accuracy. And there's also the cost of test. What's happening here is producing chili products is, the margins on chili products are actually quite low. And so when you're trying to run analytical tests for something that really has not much money in it, they actually have a problem with almost profitability. So this means that they cannot spend, the kind of scientific vigor that you see coming through the videos that we do. That kind of scientific vigor is very hard to do in a standard HPLC test house. So there's a certain cost, but I suspect that their margins are actually quite limited. So, get the result, get the sample in, prepare it, run it, send the data out. They have to work like that, because otherwise they're not going to make any profit on it. So, even though the instruments may be expensive, and HPLC, which they now named high performance liquid chromatography, even though it's actually high pressure liquid chromatography, it's got this, let's say reputation. Actually, running tests on it, it has to be quick for these test houses. And so essentially, you always get for what you pay for. So essentially, if you're getting, you're haggling over the cost of test, you will not get necessarily the quality of test that you kind of envisage that you're getting. In fact, when I look at these certificates of analysis, and actually not everyone gets these certificates of analysis, some people are just getting emails across. But when you look at it, this is actually one of the best ones I realize now. Then actually, because they call out the Scoville heat units, they say what method they're using, which is the AOAC 1995.03, but there's no error associated with this. You believe that that's accurate, but with any measurement, there's always an error, and there's no error reported. So these are kind of taken as the gold standard, and there's also no transparency. Where's the chromatogram? Where's the calibration routine? That's not in the certificates of analysis. In fact, people just take it at face value. Again, we do actually have the raw signal in our system. So HPLC, once upon a time, we used to make a big thing about, HPLC, correlation with HPLC. And then I just realized, when you make that statement, actually then somebody will sort of test it in their HPLC house. But then if they go and test it in another HPLC house, they'll have another correlation. And then you realize HPLC houses don't correlate with one another. So there's a big sort of issue. And I think that there really wouldn't be a market for ZP's FoodSense Generation 4 if actually HPLC was the, let's say, really good method of analysis for chili products. Now, you're also asking, we're not affiliated with an accreditation board. We are ISO 13485, so we're ISO 13485. It says in our certificate of analysis that we are contract developers and contract manufacturers of medical diagnostics. And so when you saw me do that glucose measurement earlier on, you saw essentially that the FoodSense Generation 4 is really similar to a medical diagnostic product, and that's because that's what we primarily do at Zimmer Peacock. Now, there are lots of vendors out there, providing these HPLC systems, and there are also lots of service providers as well, and they can get accreditation by ASTA or the AOAC. Just out of interest, the AOAC, it can take, I think, between 10 years, I don't think less than 10 years to actually get AOAC accreditation. And the AOAC and ASTA, they're both, they're not government organizations, they are limited companies with essentially owners or shareholders. So, the independence is not as independent as one would necessarily think, I think. Just out of interest, in terms of validation, I would honestly say that if people are interested in understanding whether this technology is robust or it works on real samples, just subscribe to the YouTube channel and just watch it over time, because every week we are testing something, and as I say, I've got these in, I'm not testing them in this particular one because I need to get some more chili sensors in myself, but we're always testing, and always kind of commenting and helping clients through the YouTube channel. So I can't really sort of make this big defense that we're great, we're amazing. No, just watch the channel is my only comment on that, because we are scientists and engineers at ZP. We have to be slightly conservative. So us making these kind of big statements about how great we are, I would just let the body of work talk for itself on that. So questions this week. What's a calibration protocol? There isn't one. Why? Because actually the entire device is solid state. HPLC has pumps, it has UV spectrometer in it, it has injection valves, the columns get changed on occasion. So there's lots of variables, so they do actually have to calibrate. A glucose meter, you don't calibrate. Why? Because it's basically a solid state system. And you can see how similar that is to a FoodSense Generation 4, so no calibration required. The validation study, we validate against HPLC. I've given you a link. There's some papers by a gentleman called Charlie Rower. Instrument accuracy comparing with HPLC, we think we're accurate, but I've stopped making these standard statements now because I actually realized that HPLC doesn't correlate necessarily with HPLC. So you're sort of trying to say, oh yeah, we correlate with HPLC. And then somebody says, well, I tested against this HPLC house. And then then I can do a correlation. And then somebody else says, oh, well, I'm now in a different country, by the way, testing at a national lab, and I get this correlation. So again, we correlate. But when I look at, they do what's called a meta-analysis and see if the two HPLC houses correlate with one another, lo and behold, they do not correlate with one another. So this discussion with correlating against HPLC is really tough. Accreditation bodies, we are accredited as a company. We are ISO 13485, but we're not accredited with ASTA, the American Spice Trade Association, or AOAC. AOAC used to mean something, when I say mean something, but actually nowadays doesn't have a legal meaning as such. So if you did have any questions regarding FoodSense Generation 4, what I would say about it is it's quick, it's easy to use, it's got a good customer user base now, because we've really on Generation 4, so this has actually been out for 5, 6, 7 years. I can't even remember myself now, but it's been out for a very long time, and we're actually on Generation 4. So if you have any questions of this, also the YouTube channel is a good way of kind of understanding whether this is the right technology for you. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, thanks very much.